The autumn air in the Mogollon Mountains was crisp and thin, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of an early winter. Samuel Big Sam Mackenzie swung his double-bit axe with the rhythm of a man who'd been working timber for 30 years, each strike biting deep into the towering ponderosa pine. At 45, Sam was built like the trees he felled, tall, broad-shouldered, and weathered by years of mountain living. The sound of his axe echoed through the forest, a steady percussion that had become as natural to him as breathing. Sam worked alone by choice, hauling logs down to the sawmill in Silver Creek twice a month with his team of oxen. It was a solitary life, but after losing his wife and young daughter to cholera 8 years ago, solitude had become his companion. As the massive pine began its final groan toward the earth, Sam stepped back and wiped the sweat from his brow despite the cool October air. The tree fell with a crash that sent birds exploding from nearby branches and small animals scurrying for cover. Sam was examining the fallen trunk when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong in the wilderness symphony of wind, birds, and rustling leaves. It was faint, but unmistakably human, the soft crying of a child. He froze, listening intently. The sound came again, seeming to drift from somewhere deeper in the forest, beyond a rocky outcropping about 50 yards to the north. Sam had been working this section of timber claim for 3 weeks and knew every sound the mountain made. This was different. Moving carefully through the underbrush, Sam followed the intermittent crying. His weathered hands unconsciously checked the Colt .45 on his hip. These mountains weren't entirely safe, and the Apache wars had left everyone cautious, even though most of the tribes had been relocated to reservations years ago. The crying led him to a jumble of granite boulders that formed natural caves and crevices. As he climbed carefully over the rocks, the sound became clearer, and Sam's heart began to race. It wasn't just one child. There were 2 voices, both young, both speaking in what sounded like Apache. Sam approached the largest cave opening, a narrow cleft between 2 massive boulders. The crying stopped abruptly, replaced by hushed whispers and the sound of movement deeper in the cave. "Hello," Sam called softly, not wanting to frighten whoever was inside. "I'm not going to hurt you." Silence. Sam crouched down and peered into the cave. In the dim light filtering through the opening, he could make out 2 small figures huddled against the back wall. Children, definitely. One perhaps 8 or 9 years old, the other younger, maybe 5 or 6. "Are you hurt?" Sam asked gently, though he doubted they understood English. The older child, a girl, Sam realized, stepped protectively in front of the younger one, a boy. She spoke rapidly in Apache, her voice fierce despite her obvious fear and exhaustion. Sam didn't speak Apache, but he'd lived in Arizona territory long enough to recognize the tone. The girl was warning him away, trying to protect her companion. Both children were painfully thin, their clothes little more than ragged remnants of traditional Apache dress. The boy was clearly sick, his breathing labored and his face flushed with fever. Sam sat back on his heels, thinking. These children were alone, probably had been for days or longer based on their condition. The nearest Apache reservation was over 100 miles away, and there hadn't been any reported raids or conflicts in this area for months. How had they come to be here, alone in the wilderness as winter approached? Moving slowly, Sam pulled his canteen from his belt and set it on a rock near the cave entrance. Then he unwrapped a piece of hardtack and jerky from his lunch and placed it beside the water. "Food," he said simply, pointing to the offerings. "Water." The children stared at him with large, dark eyes that held too much wariness for their ages. The girl's protective stance never wavered, but Sam could see her glancing at the food with desperate hunger. Sam backed away from the cave entrance and sat down on a nearby boulder, close enough to show he wasn't abandoning them, but far enough to seem less threatening. He pulled out his own lunch and began eating slowly, demonstrating that the food was safe. After several minutes, the girl crept forward and quickly grabbed the canteen and food before retreating into the cave. Sam heard the sound of urgent whispering, and then the boy's weak voice as he was given water. "My name is Sam," he said quietly, not expecting them to understand, but hoping his tone would convey his peaceful intentions. "Sam Mackenzie." The girl appeared at the cave mouth again, studying him with intelligent eyes. She was beautiful despite her obvious ordeal, high cheekbones and long black hair that spoke of her Apache heritage. But it was her eyes that struck Sam most. They held a depth of responsibility and sorrow that no child should carry. She pointed to herself and said something in Apache. Then she gestured toward the back of the cave and spoke again, presumably referring to the boy. Sam nodded and pointed to himself. Sam. Then he gestured toward the cave. You. The girl hesitated for a long moment, then said quietly, Ayana. She pointed toward the cave. Nailnish. Ayana. Sam repeated carefully. Nailnish. For the first time, something that might have been the ghost of a smile flickered across the girl's face. Sam spent the rest of the afternoon near the cave, occasionally offering food or water, but mostly just being present, letting the children grow accustomed to him. As the sun began to set and the mountain air turned cold, he could hear the boy coughing more frequently. He's sick, Sam said, though he knew they couldn't understand. He made gestures indicating fever and coughing, pointing toward the cave. Ayana's face crumpled with worry, and she nodded vigorously. She spoke rapidly in Apache, her voice filled with desperate urgency that transcended language barriers. Sam stood up slowly. I need to go back to my camp, he said, gesturing down the mountain. But I'll return tomorrow. Tomorrow, he repeated, pointing to the sky and making a circular motion to indicate the passage of time. Ayana watched him carefully, then nodded. As Sam turned to leave, she called out softly. When he looked back, she had emerged from the cave and was holding something out to him, a small piece of carved wood, worn smooth by handling. Sam approached carefully and accepted the offering. It was a tiny horse, beautifully crafted despite its simplicity. He looked up at Ayana with surprise and gratitude. Thank you, he said, holding the carving carefully. Thank you, Ayana. As Sam made his way back through the darkening forest to his camp, his mind raced with questions and concerns. How had these children come to be alone in the mountains? Were they runaways from a reservation, or survivors of something worse? The boy clearly needed medical attention, but the nearest doctor was in Silver Creek, a hard day's journey down the mountain. That night, Sam sat by his campfire staring at the small wooden horse and thinking about his own daughter, Mary, who would have been about Ayana's age if she had lived. He'd spent 8 years trying to forget the sound of a child's laughter, the feeling of small arms around his neck, the weight of responsibility for another human being's life and happiness. Now, alone in the mountains with winter approaching, he'd found 2 children who needed help. Children who had no one else in the world, just as he had no one else. It felt like providence, or perhaps penance for all the ways he'd failed his own family. Sam made his decision as the fire died down to embers. Tomorrow, he would figure out how to help Ayana and Nailnish, regardless of the complications their presence might bring. They were children, alone and afraid, and that was all that mattered. In the distance, a wolf howled its lonesome song to the stars, and Sam pulled his blanket closer against the mountain cold. Somewhere up in those rocks, 2 small figures were probably listening to the same sound and drawing closer together for warmth and comfort. Tomorrow would bring challenges he couldn't yet imagine. But tonight, for the first time in 8 years, Sam Mackenzie wasn't the only person in the world carrying the weight of survival on his shoulders. Sam awoke before dawn to the sound of snow beginning to fall, just a light dusting, but enough to remind him that winter in the Mogollon Mountains was no place for sick children living in a cave. He loaded his pack with extra food, blankets, and a small bottle of whiskey that might help fight the boy's fever, then made his way through the gray morning light toward the rocky outcropping. As he approached the cave, he could hear Nailnish coughing, a deep, rattling sound that made Sam's chest tighten with worry. The boy was getting worse, and they were running out of time. Ayana, Sam called softly. It's Sam. The girl appeared at the cave entrance almost immediately, as if she'd been watching for him. Her face was drawn with exhaustion and worry, and Sam realized she probably hadn't slept all night, watching over her sick companion. Sam set down his pack and pulled out a thick wool blanket, holding it up so she could see it. For the boy, he said, making wrapping motions. Warm. Ayana nodded eagerly and reached for the blanket. As she did, Sam caught a glimpse of Nailnish deeper in the cave. The child was clearly fevering, his small body shaking with chills despite the relatively mild morning. Sam pulled out more items from his pack: strips of dried beef, hardtack, a small pot for heating water. But most importantly, he withdrew a small leather pouch that contained willow bark powder, something he'd learned to make during his years in the mountains. "Medicine," Sam said, holding up the pouch and pointing to the cave where Nailnish lay. "For fever." Ayana looked uncertain, studying Sam's face as if trying to read his intentions. The wariness in her eyes spoke of experiences that had taught her not to trust easily. Sam sat down cross-legged near the cave entrance and began building a small fire with practiced efficiency. When the flames caught, he filled his pot with water from his canteen and set it to heat. Then he took a small amount of the willow bark powder and showed it to Ayana. "Medicine," he repeated, then went through an elaborate pantomime of drinking tea and feeling better, touching his forehead to indicate fever going away. For the first time since he'd found them, Ayana smiled, a real smile that transformed her young face and made Sam's heart clench with memory of his own daughter. She disappeared into the cave and returned a moment later, carefully carrying Nailnish. The boy was even smaller than Sam had realized, probably only 5 years old, with delicate features and the same intelligent dark eyes as his sister. But those eyes were glassy with fever, and his breathing was shallow and rapid. Ayana sat near the fire, holding Nailnish against her chest with fierce protectiveness. She spoke to him in Apache, her voice gentle and soothing despite her obvious fear. Sam prepared the willow bark tea with careful attention, making sure the dosage was appropriate for a small child. When it was ready, he let it cool to a temperature that wouldn't burn the boy's mouth, then offered the cup to Ayana. She hesitated, then dipped her finger in the liquid and tasted it herself first. Sam nodded approvingly. The girl was smart and careful, exactly what had probably kept him alive this long. Satisfied that the tea wasn't harmful, Ayana began coaxing Nailnish to drink it. The boy was weak and could only manage small sips, but Sam was encouraged to see him taking the medicine. While they waited for the tea to work, Sam tried to communicate with Ayana using gestures and simple words. He pointed to himself and said, "Sam," then pointed to her and waited. "Ayana," she said clearly. Sam pointed to the boy. "Nailnish." She nodded, then spoke several words in Apache while touching the boy's head gently. From her tone and expressions, Sam gathered she was explaining that Nailnish was sick and that she was worried about him. Sam nodded seriously, then pointed to himself and made caring gestures toward both children. "I help," he said. "Help Ayana. Help Nailnish." Ayana studied his face for a long moment, then seemed to make a decision. She began speaking in Apache, her words coming in a rush as if she'd been holding them in for too long. Though Sam couldn't understand the language, he could hear the pain and exhaustion in her voice. When she finished, Sam reached out slowly and gently touched her shoulder. "Safe," he said firmly. "You safe with Sam." Tears began to flow down Ayana's cheeks, the first emotional release Sam had seen from her. She wiped them away quickly, but not before Sam saw the depth of her fear and relief. As the morning progressed, Nailnish's fever seemed to break slightly. He was able to drink more of the tea and even ate a small piece of softened hardtack. Sam was encouraged by the improvement, but he knew the boy needed more care than they could provide in a cave. Around midday, Sam made a decision that would change all their lives. He stood up and gestured for Ayana to follow him a short distance from the cave, where they could talk without disturbing Nailnish. "My camp," Sam said, pointing down the mountain. "Warm. Food. Safe." He made building motions with his hands. "House." Ayana looked back toward the cave where Nailnish lay, then at Sam. The conflict in her face was clear. She wanted to trust him, wanted the safety and warmth he offered, but something held her back. Sam sat down on a fallen log and patted the space beside him, inviting her to sit. When she did, he pulled out the small wooden horse she'd given him the day before. "Beautiful," he said, admiring the carving. "You make." Ayana shook her head and spoke a single word in Apache, then made rocking motions with her arms as if holding a baby. "Mother," Sam said softly, understanding. "Your mother made this." Ayana nodded, fresh tears threatening. She spoke several more words in Apache, and though Sam couldn't understand them, he heard the grief in her voice. Sam pulled out his wallet and carefully removed a small daguerreotype, a photograph of his wife Ellen holding baby Mary. He showed it to Ayanna. "My family," he said quietly. "My wife Ellen, my daughter Mary." He touched the photo gently. "Gone. Sick. Both gone." Ayanna studied the photograph with solemn attention, then looked up at Sam with new understanding in her eyes. They shared something now, the pain of loss, the loneliness of being the only one left. Sam put the photograph away and looked directly at Ayanna. "I know hurt," he said. "I know alone. But you're not alone now. Nailnish not alone." He gestured toward his camp again. "Come with Sam. Warm place. Medicine. Food." He made protective gestures. "Sam protect Ayanna. Sam protect Nailnish." Ayanna was quiet for several minutes, weighing his words and his intentions. Finally, she stood up and walked back to the cave. Sam could hear her speaking quietly to Nailnish in Apache, presumably explaining the situation. When she emerged, she was carrying their few possessions, another small carving, a piece of beadwork, and what looked like a child's moccasin, everything they had left of their former life. "We come," she said in careful English, the first English word Sam had heard her speak. Sam's face broke into a genuine smile. "We go home," he said, standing up and shouldering his pack. As they carefully made their way down the mountain, Sam carrying the weak Nailnish, while Ayanna walked close beside them, the snow began to fall more heavily. By the time they reached Sam's camp, a small clearing with a sturdy log cabin and outbuildings, the ground was white with fresh powder. Sam's cabin was simple but comfortable, one large room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area, and a sleeping loft. It was the home of a man who lived alone, but wasn't ashamed of his surroundings. As Sam built up the fire and prepared a place for Nailnish to rest, Ayanna stood near the door, clearly overwhelmed by being inside walls again. Her eyes took in every detail, the furniture, the books on the shelf, the photographs on the mantelpiece, the rifles mounted on the wall. "Safe," Sam repeated, seeing her anxiety. "This home now. Your home." That evening, as Nailnish slept peacefully in a real bed for the first time in months and Ayanna curled up in a chair near the fire, Sam realized that his solitary life in the mountains had just come to an end. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. How to care for Apache children in a territory where tensions still ran high. How to communicate with them. How to help them heal from whatever trauma had brought them to that cave. But tonight, as he listened to the sound of children breathing safely under his roof, Sam Mackenzie felt something he hadn't experienced in 8 years. The sense that he was needed, that his life had purpose beyond mere survival. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the mountains in peaceful white. Inside the cabin, 3 survivors of different tragedies had found each other and begun the slow process of building something new from the pieces of their broken lives. 2 weeks had passed since Sam brought Ayanna and Nailnish to his cabin, and the transformation in both children was remarkable. Nailnish's fever had broken completely, his cough had cleared, and he was gaining weight from regular meals. More importantly, both children were beginning to trust Sam, and their natural resilience was reasserting itself. Sam had rigged up sleeping areas in the cabin's loft for the children, and Ayanna had shown an eager interest in learning English while teaching Sam a few Apache words in return. Nailnish, despite his young age, was proving to be remarkably observant and quick to learn. The morning started like many others, with Sam teaching Ayanna how to help with breakfast, while Nailnish played with wooden blocks Sam had carved for him. The domestic routine felt natural now, filling a hole in Sam's life he hadn't even realized was there. But their peaceful existence was shattered by the sound of multiple horses approaching the cabin. Sam immediately tensed, recognizing the disciplined rhythm of cavalry mounts. He moved quickly to the window and saw 6 soldiers in blue uniforms riding into his clearing, led by a lieutenant with a hard face and suspicious eyes. "Ayanna," Sam said quietly, "take Nailnish to the back room. Stay quiet." The girl immediately understood the danger. She gathered up Nailnish and disappeared into Sam's bedroom, closing the door softly behind them. Sam opened the cabin door before the soldiers could knock, stepping out onto the porch with a casual demeanor that masked his racing heart. "Morning, Lieutenant," Sam said, nodding to the young officer. "What brings the Army up into these mountains?" Lieutenant Daniel Crawford dismounted, his pale blue eyes scanning the cabin and surroundings with military precision. "Samuel Mackenzie?" "That's right. Lieutenant Crawford, Fort Apache. We're conducting a search for missing Apache children, 2 runaways from the reservation who've been tracked to this area." Sam kept his expression neutral despite the cold fear settling in his stomach. "Apache children? Up here? That seems unlikely, Lieutenant. These mountains are pretty harsh country for young ones." Nevertheless, our scouts tracked them this far before losing the trail in the recent snowfall. Crawford stepped closer to the porch. "Mind if we take a look around your property?" "I'd mind, actually," Sam replied calmly. "This is private land, and I haven't seen any Apache children. If I had, I'd have reported it to the proper authorities." Crawford's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Mackenzie, harboring runaway Apache is a federal crime. If you're found to be hiding these children, you'll face serious charges." "And if I'm not hiding anyone, then you're wasting your time and mine," Sam countered. "You have any kind of warrant, Lieutenant?" The young officer's jaw tightened. He clearly wasn't used to being questioned by civilians. "We don't need a warrant to pursue escaped Apache. They're considered federal property." The words made Sam's blood boil, but he kept his voice level. "Well, as I said, I haven't seen any children, Apache or otherwise." From behind Crawford, one of the soldiers spoke up. "Lieutenant, there's smoke coming from the chimney, and I can see what looks like children's clothing hanging on that line behind the cabin." Sam cursed silently. Ayanna had washed some of their clothes the day before, and he'd forgotten they were still hanging out to dry. Crawford smiled coldly. "Care to explain that, Mr. Mackenzie?" Before Sam could answer, the cabin door opened behind him, and Ayanna stepped out, her chin raised defiantly. She spoke directly to Crawford in English, her words careful but clear. "We are not your property," she said. "We are free." Crawford's hand moved instinctively to his sidearm. Well, the missing children." He looked back at Sam with contempt. "You lied to a federal officer, Mackenzie." "I protected 2 children who needed help," Sam replied firmly. "There's a difference." "Not in the eyes of the law." Crawford gestured to his men. "Sergeant, place Mr. Mackenzie under arrest. We'll take the children back to the fort." "No." Ayanna stepped in front of Sam. "He saved us. He gave us food, medicine, home." Crawford ignored her protest. "Apache children belong on the reservation, where they can be properly supervised and educated in civilized ways." "Educated?" Sam's control finally snapped. "You mean beaten into forgetting who they are? I've heard stories about those reservation schools, Lieutenant." "Those stories are none of your concern," Crawford replied coldly. "Sergeant," I said, "arrest him." As the sergeant moved forward with iron shackles, Nailnish appeared in the doorway, drawn by the raised voices. The sight of the small boy made Crawford pause. Nailnish was clearly very young and still somewhat fragile from his recent illness. "How old is the boy?" Crawford asked, something in his voice softening slightly. 5, Ayanna answered protectively. "He was sick. Sam made him well." Crawford studied both children more carefully, and Sam could see conflict in the young officer's face. Whatever his orders were, executing them was proving more difficult than he'd anticipated. "Lieutenant," Sam said quietly, "these children aren't criminals. They're orphans who nearly died in the wilderness. The girl's been taking care of her brother alone for months. Whatever happened to their family, whatever brought them to these mountains, they've been through enough." "Their circumstances are unfortunate," Crawford admitted, "but the law is clear. All Apache belong on designated reservations." "Even children who were born free?" Sam asked. "Even orphans with no family left to claim them?" Crawford was quiet for a moment, clearly struggling with the situation. "Mr. Mackenzie, I have orders to return any Apache found off reservation lands. I can't simply ignore those orders." "What if they weren't Apache?" Sam asked suddenly. "What do you mean?" Sam looked at Ayanna, seeing the intelligence and understanding in her eyes. She was following the conversation carefully and seemed to grasp what he was suggesting. What if they were Mexican children who'd been adopted by Apache? Or half-breeds with Mexican papers? Sam was thinking fast, remembering stories he'd heard of mixed families along the border. Would your orders still apply? Crawford frowned. Do you have documentation proving they're not full Apache? Not with me, Sam said carefully. But I could get it. Their family records are with a priest in Tucson. It was a complete fabrication, but Sam delivered it with the confidence of a man who'd spent years negotiating timber contracts and dealing with bureaucrats. Ayana, understanding the game being played, spoke up. Sí, somos medio mexicanos, she said in surprisingly good Spanish. Our mama was Mexican. Sam tried not to show his surprise at her quick thinking. The girl was not only intelligent but adaptable, exactly the kind of person who could survive in a harsh world. Crawford looked uncertain. If that's true, then the situation becomes more complicated. I'd need proper documentation before I could determine jurisdiction. Of course, Sam agreed. But that documentation is in Tucson, and it's getting late in the day. Dangerous to travel these mountain roads after dark, especially with children. The lieutenant checked his pocket watch, clearly torn between his orders and the practical realities of the situation. We can make camp here tonight and head down to Tucson tomorrow to verify this documentation. You're welcome to camp in my clearing, Sam offered. Though I should warn you, we're expecting a significant snowstorm tonight. My cabin's not big enough for everyone, but you're welcome to use my barn. As if summoned by his words, the wind picked up and thick clouds began rolling over the mountain peaks. The temperature was dropping noticeably, and the horses were becoming restless. Crawford made his decision. We'll camp here tonight and sort this out in the morning. But Mr. Mackenzie, if you're lying about those documents... I understand completely, Lieutenant. As the soldiers set up camp in Sam's barn and tended to their horses, Sam gathered Ayana and Nailnish in the cabin. How do you know Spanish? He asked Ayana quietly. Mama taught us, she replied. She said knowing many languages would help us survive in the world. Sam looked at this remarkable girl with new respect. Your mother was a wise woman. But Ayana, we're in serious trouble. I don't know how long I can convince them you're not full Apache. Ayana was quiet for a moment, then looked up at Sam with determination in her dark eyes. Then we must leave. Tonight in the storm. Sam felt his heart sink. He'd known this moment might come, but he wasn't prepared for how much it would hurt to lose them. Where will you go? Winter's coming, and these mountains are dangerous. We survived before, Ayana said simply. We will survive again. Not this time, Sam said firmly. This time we stick together. All three of us. Ayana's eyes widened. You would leave your home. For us. Sam looked around the cabin he'd built with his own hands, at the life he'd constructed in his self-imposed exile. Then he looked at these two children who'd brought purpose and joy back into his existence. Home isn't a place, he said quietly. It's who you're with. Outside, the first snowflakes of the storm began to fall, and Sam started making plans for the most dangerous journey of his life, leading two Apache children to safety while staying ahead of the United States Army. The blizzard struck with the fury that only mountain storms could muster, turning the world into a howling white void. By midnight, snow was falling so heavily that visibility extended barely beyond arm's reach, and the wind drove icy needles through any gap in clothing or shelter. Sam had waited until he was certain the soldiers were settled in the barn before beginning their escape preparations. He moved quietly through the cabin, gathering essential supplies, food, warm clothing, ammunition, and medical supplies. Every item had to be carefully chosen. They could only carry what was absolutely necessary for survival. Ayana helped with silent efficiency, her movements betraying none of the fear she must have felt. She wrapped their few personal possessions in an old cloth and tucked a bundle inside her coat. Nailnish, awakened from sleep and told they were going on a journey, accepted the news with the adaptability of a child who'd already learned that life could change without warning. The storm will cover our tracks, Sam whispered as he checked his rifle one final time. But it's also dangerous. We'll have to move slowly and stay close together. Sam had spent 30 years in these mountains and knew them better than any man alive, but navigating in a blizzard was treacherous even for him. Their destination was a remote trading post called Sutter Station, about 15 miles northeast, far enough to avoid immediate pursuit, but close enough to reach before the children succumbed to the cold. They slipped out through the cabin's back door into the storm. The cold hit them like a physical blow, and Sam immediately pulled both children close, creating a shelter with his large frame as they made their way toward the tree line. The first hour was the most dangerous. They had to cross open ground where the wind was strongest and the snow deepest, while staying far enough from the barn to avoid detection. Sam carried Nailnish on his back, while Ayanna struggled through snow that sometimes reached her waist. Once they reached the forest, the trees provided some protection from the wind, but navigation became even more challenging. Sam had to rely on instinct and memory, using the feel of the slope beneath his feet and the sound of the wind through different types of trees to guide their direction. "How do you know where we're going?" Ayanna asked during one of their brief rests, her breath forming ice crystals in the frigid air. "I've walked every trail in these mountains," Sam replied, adjusting Nailnish's position on his back. The boy had fallen asleep despite the cold and danger, exhausted by their ordeal. "Your people understood these mountains too. They knew how to read the land, how to find their way by signs most folks never notice." Ayanna was quiet for a moment. "You know about Apache ways?" "Some. I've lived here long enough to learn respect for the people who understood this land before the rest of us arrived." Sam looked at her through the swirling snow. "Your mother and father, what happened to them?" Ayanna's face tightened with old pain. "Soldiers came to our village. They said we had to go to the reservation, leave our home. Papa said no. Our family had never fought the white man. We lived in peace. But they came anyway." She was quiet for so long that Sam thought she might not continue. Then her voice came again, barely audible over the wind. "Papa and the other men tried to protect the village. There was fighting. Many died. Mama took Nailnish and me into the mountains to hide. She said wait there. She would come back when it was safe. But she didn't come back." Ayanna shook her head. "We waited many days. Then we knew. No one was coming." Sam felt anger burning in his chest, anger at the system that had made orphans of these children, at the fear and prejudice that saw Apache as problems to be solved rather than people to be understood. "How long were you alone in the mountains?" "Maybe 2 moons. Mama taught us to find food, to hide, to survive. But when Nailnish got sick..." Ayanna's voice broke slightly. "I thought he would die like Mama and Papa." Sam stopped walking and knelt down, so he was at Ayanna's eye level, despite the driving snow. "Listen to me, Ayanna. You did everything right. You kept your brother alive. You found shelter. You were careful about strangers. Your parents would be proud of how brave and smart you've been." Tears froze on Ayanna's cheeks, but she stood straighter. "Where will we go? After this place you're taking us?" Sam had been dreading this question. "There's a man at the trading post, Jeremiah Sutter. He's helped other people who needed to disappear. He might know of a place where you'd be safe." "What about you?" The simple question hit Sam harder than he'd expected. "I don't know, Ayanna. The army will be looking for me now. I can't go back to my cabin." They walked in silence for another hour, struggling through deepening snow as the storm raged around them. Sam's legs were beginning to ache from the effort of breaking trail, and he could see that Ayanna was tiring despite her determination. Just when he was beginning to worry they might have lost their way, Sam spotted a familiar landmark, a lightning-struck pine that stood like a skeletal finger against the white sky. They were close to Sutter Station. The trading post appeared through the snow like a vision from a dream, a long, low building with warm yellow light glowing from its windows and smoke rising from multiple chimneys. Sam had never been so grateful to see a human habitation. Jeremiah Sutter himself answered their knock, a grizzled man in his 60s with sharp eyes and a generous heart hidden beneath a crusty exterior. He took one look at the unlikely trio on his doorstep and immediately ushered them inside. "Sam Mackenzie, you old fool," Sutter said as he helped them out of their snow-covered coats. "What are you doing out in the storm with children?" "Long story, Jeremiah. one that might put you in danger just by hearing it. Sutter studied Ayanna and Nailnish, noting their Apache features and the way they stayed close to Sam. Army trouble. The worst kind. Sutter nodded grimly. Then you'd better tell me everything while I get some hot food into these young ones. As Sam related their story, Sutter listened without interruption, his expression growing more serious with each detail. When Sam finished, the old trader was quiet for several minutes, staring into the fire. The nearest safe place for Apache children would be Mexico, he said finally. There are communities down there, people who've helped others in similar situations. Mexico's hundreds of miles away, Sam protested. How could we? Not we, Sam. They. Sutter's voice was gentle but firm. You can't go with them. The Army will be watching every known associate of yours. But I know people who can help them reach safety. Sam felt his heart breaking. He looked at Ayanna, who was listening intently despite her exhaustion, and saw the fear and confusion in her eyes. There has to be another way, Sam said desperately. They're just children, Jeremiah. They need to be free, Sutter interrupted. And you need to be alive to help other people who might find themselves in similar situations. Ayanna stood up from where she'd been sitting by the fire. Sam comes with us, she said firmly. We are family now. The simple declaration hit Sam like a physical blow. In 2 weeks, these children had come to mean more to him than his own life, and the thought of losing them was unbearable. Ayanna, Sam said gently, if I come with you, the soldiers will never stop looking. They'll follow us to Mexico, to wherever we go. But if you go with Mr. Sutter's friends, you can disappear. Be safe. We don't want to disappear from you. Nailnish spoke up for the first time that evening, his small voice carrying surprising determination. Sutter cleared his throat. There might be another option. It's risky, but it could work. Both Sam and Ayanna turned to him expectantly. There's a Mexican family in Tucson, the Hernandezes. They lost their 2 children to smallpox last year. Elena Hernandez has been interested in adoption. If we could get proper papers saying these children are Mexican orphans, not Apache. But they are Apache, Ayanna said proudly. Why should we pretend to be something else? Sam knelt down beside her. Because sometimes, Ayanna, we have to choose between being proud and being safe. Your mother spoke Spanish to you for a reason. She knew this day might come. Ayanna was quiet for a long time, her intelligent eyes moving between Sam and Sutter. Finally, she spoke. If we become Mexican, can Sam visit us? Sutter nodded. Eventually. Once the Army stops looking, once things settle down. It might take a year, maybe 2. But yes. And we would be together? Nailnish and me. The Hernandezes specifically want to adopt siblings. They understand how important it is for children to stay together. Sam saw hope flickering in Ayanna's eyes, and his heart ached with the knowledge that this was the best chance these children had for a normal life. What about you, Sam? She asked. Where will you go? Sam had been wondering the same thing. His old life was over, the cabin, the timber claim, the peaceful solitude he'd built for himself. But looking at these children, he realized that solitude had never really been peace anyway. I'll figure something out, he said. Maybe help Mr. Sutter here at the trading post. Maybe find other children who need help. Ayanna studied his face carefully, then made a decision that would echo through all their lives. Then we wait, she said. We become Mexican, we live with the family, we learn their ways. But we remember who we are, and we remember you. And when it's safe, we come back. Ayanna. No, she said firmly. You saved us. Now we save you too. A family doesn't abandon each other. Over the next 3 days, while the blizzard raged outside, they made their plans. Sutter sent word through his network of contacts, setting in motion a complex web of forged documents and careful lies. The Hernandez family was contacted and agreed to the adoption. A priest in Tucson was convinced to backdate baptismal records. Sam used the time to teach the children everything he could. English phrases that would help them blend in, stories about Mexican customs, even basic reading and writing. Ayanna absorbed everything with the hunger of someone who understood that knowledge was survival. On the 3rd morning, the storm finally broke, leaving the world transformed into a crystal wonderland of snow and ice. It was beautiful and treacherous, perfect for concealing their movements. A wagon arrived at midday, driven by a Mexican trader named Carlos, who worked with Sutter's underground network. He would take the children to Tucson, where the Hernandez family waited. As they prepared to leave, Sam felt the full weight of what they were doing. These children had become his family in every way that mattered, and now he was sending them away to protect them. Ayanna approached him as he loaded their few possessions into the wagon. She was carrying the small wooden horse her mother had carved, and she pressed it into Sam's hands. So you remember us, she said simply. I could never forget you, Sam replied, his voice thick with emotion. Either of you. Nailnish wrapped his small arms around Sam's waist. Will you really come see us? Try to stop me, Sam said, lifting the boy for one last embrace. As the wagon pulled away through the snow, Sam stood watching until it disappeared around a bend in the mountain road. In his hand, He clutched the wooden horse, and in his heart, he carried the promise that this wasn't goodbye. It was just a longer journey than most. 6 months later, Sam received a letter through Sutter's network. It was written in careful English and signed Maria and Miguel Hernandez, the new names Ayana and Nailnish had taken. They were well, they were learning, and they were waiting. Sam smiled as he read the letter, then carefully folded it and placed it in his pocket next to the wooden horse. He had work to do. Sutter had told him about other children who needed help, other families torn apart by the harsh realities of a changing world. But someday, when the time was right, he would make that journey to Tucson. He would see Ayana and Nailnish again, would watch them grow into the remarkable adults he knew they would become. Until then, he had found his purpose, not in the solitary life of a mountain hermit, but in the dangerous, necessary work of protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. In the Mogollon Mountains, where 2 Apache children had once lived in a cave, spring snow still fell on an empty cabin, but the love that had filled that cabin during 2 precious weeks lived on, carried in the hearts of 3 people who had found each other in the wilderness and learned that family is not about blood or law. It's about the choice to care for each other, no matter the cost.